A little girl's voice pierced the hushed courtroom where a millionaire was being tried for a terrible crime. "I can stop this from happening!" She then whispered something to the judge, and days later, the millionaire walked free. When he asked her what she had said, the truth shocked him, and it will shock you too. Comment what you think will happen, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. The cry echoed through the marble halls of the Justice Center in Willow Creek, Pennsylvania, like lightning across a stormy morning sky. 4-year-old Willow burst through the double doors of the courtroom, her bare feet slapping against the cold floor as her words tumbled out in desperation. "You can't do this to him. He didn't do anything wrong." The silence that followed was deafening. Dozens of eyes swiveled to the skinny child, her brown hair tangled and her dress, once white, now rumpled. Her cheeks were smudged with dirt, and her big eyes gleamed with a determination that belied her fragile appearance. In the center of the room, Jasper Blackwood stood beside his table, his pale face reflecting 2 years of torment. At 52, the entrepreneur had built the largest furniture factory in the county with his own 2 hands, employing 300 families. But in recent months, his life had become a nightmare after being accused of evading millions in taxes, harming hundreds of workers dependent on public resources. Judge Caldwell, known throughout the region for his unwavering severity, adjusted his glasses and observed the small intruder. His 40 years on the bench had never prepared him for this. The girl everyone knew from the courthouse steps, always begging for change and leftover food, was interrupting the most anticipated trial of the decade. "Young lady, this is not a place for you," the judge said in a firm voice. But Willow didn't budge. She walked to Jasper's table, her small steps echoing in the tense silence of the room. "I know who's lying," she whispered, looking directly into the businessman's eyes. "I heard them talking. They want you to go to jail, but you didn't do anything wrong." Jasper felt his heart leap. For 2 long years he had faced accusations he knew were false, but couldn't prove his innocence. His savings had been depleted on lawyers, his reputation was ruined, and many employees had already lost faith in him. The factory he had built with so much love was on the verge of bankruptcy. Across the room, Prosecutor Sterling adjusted himself in his chair, visibly annoyed by the interruption. At 45, he was known for his rigid stance and for never losing a high-profile case. Beside him, the clerk, Mr. Abernathy, scribbled nervously on his papers, avoiding eye contact with the girl. "Your Honor, I request that this child be removed from the premises," Sterling said with authority. "She has no legal capacity to participate in these proceedings." But Willow wasn't intimidated. She approached the judge's bench with the courage of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Can I talk in your ear?" she asked, her childish voice contrasting with the gravity of the atmosphere. Judge Caldwell hesitated. In all his career, he had never encountered such an unusual situation. Something in that child's gaze intrigued him. There was a transparency there he rarely saw in adult witnesses. "Come closer," he said finally, leaning in to hear what the girl had to say. Willow climbed onto the small step leading to the magistrate's bench and whispered something in his ear. The words were few but precise. As she spoke, the judge's face paled visibly. His eyes turned slowly to the prosecutor and then to the clerk, an expression of shock taking over his features. "Court is adjourned," he declared abruptly, striking the gavel forcefully. "We will return in 3 days for a new analysis of the evidence." The room erupted in confused murmurs. Journalists tried to approach Willow, lawyers whispered theories, and the audience exchanged perplexed glances. Jasper remained still, not fully understanding what had happened, but feeling for the first time in 2 years a glimmer of hope. As people left the room, Willow remained standing next to the judge's bench, watching everything with her big, attentive eyes. She'd spent the last 2 years living on the streets after her mother mysteriously disappeared, leaving her in the care of a neighbor who soon abandoned her on the courthouse steps. Since then, that place had become her refuge. She knew every corridor, every employee, every lawyer. She knew where to find food in the trash, where to sleep when it rained, and above all, she knew how to listen. Her survival depended on paying attention to everything around her, and gradually she had developed an extraordinary memory for conversations and details. Jasper approached her slowly, still processing what he had witnessed. "What did you say to the judge?" he asked, crouching down to be at the girl's height. Willow watched him for a moment, studying his tired face and eyes filled with deep sadness. "I said I heard the man in the black suit talking to the other man who writes," she replied, pointing discreetly to where the prosecutor and the clerk had been standing. "They were planning to put fake papers in your file, papers that would make it look like you stole money." The businessman felt his legs weaken. "When did you hear this?" "A long time ago. I hide behind the big plants when it rains and they don't see me. I heard them saying that another man would pay a lot of money if they managed to get you arrested." Jasper looked around the nearly empty room, making sure they weren't overheard. The girl's revelation confirmed his darkest suspicions, but now he needed to understand the extent of the conspiracy that had destroyed his life. "Do you know who this other man is?" Willow shook her head, but her eyes gleamed as if she remembered something important. "I don't know his name, but I heard them talking about a furniture factory too. They said that when you were gone, he would get all the customers." Jasper's heart raced. There was only one person in the county who would benefit from his downfall: Theodore Cartwright, owner of the second largest furniture factory in the city. They had always been competitors, but Jasper never imagined that the rivalry could reach this level of malice. In the 3 days that followed, the entire city speculated about what had happened in the courtroom. Local newspapers published headlines about the mystery girl who had interrupted the trial, and many questioned whether a street child could really have relevant information for such a complex case. Jasper spent those days on an emotional roller coaster. For the first time in 2 years, he felt that maybe he could prove his innocence, but he also feared that it was all just a cruel illusion. He looked for Willow several times on the courthouse steps, bringing food and trying to better understand what she had witnessed. The girl, in turn, seemed to carry a weight too great for her 4 years. She had survived alone on the streets, developing sharp instincts and an impressive perception of the people around her. But now, for the first time, someone was really listening to her, and that scared her as much as it thrilled her. On the morning of the 3rd day, when the court reconvened, the atmosphere was completely different. Judge Caldwell had spent the last 72 hours discreetly investigating the girl's allegations, and what he discovered left him deeply disturbed with the very structure of the system he had served for decades. The trial session resumed under a climate of palpable tension. Judge Caldwell entered the room with a somber expression that few had ever seen in his 40 years of career. His discreet investigations of the last 3 days had revealed irregularities that shook his faith in the judicial system. Willow was sitting in the back of the room, next to a social worker who had been assigned to accompany her. The girl firmly held a small piece of bread that Jasper had given her before the hearing began, her big eyes observing every movement in the room with an attention that impressed the adults present. "Before we proceed with the reading of the sentence," the judge announced, "I must communicate that new evidence has been brought to my attention. Evidence that casts serious doubts on the veracity of the charges presented against the defendant, Jasper Blackwood." A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowded room. Journalists prepared to write down every word, and families of factory workers leaned forward, trying to capture every nuance of the magistrate's expression. Prosecutor Sterling shifted uncomfortably in his chair. In the last 3 days, he had noticed strange movements in the forum. Employees who usually greeted him cordially now looked away, and his secretary had mentioned that investigators had requested access to old files of his cases. "Mr. Prosecutor," the judge said, fixing his penetrating eyes on Sterling, I would like you to clarify some discrepancies found in the documents presented as evidence against the defendant. Sterling stood up slowly, his usual confidence replaced by obvious nervousness. Your Honor, I do not understand to what discrepancies you refer. All documents were obtained through the appropriate legal channels. At that moment, the judge made a discreet signal to a bailiff, who brought a box containing papers and folders. Interesting, said Caldwell, removing some documents, because a technical analysis performed in recent days has revealed that certain signatures in these documents present characteristics inconsistent with the handwriting patterns of Mr. Jasper Blackwood. The silence in the room was broken only by the sound of paper being handled. Jasper felt his heart leap, barely able to believe what he was hearing. For 2 years, he had insisted that he had never signed those documents, but no one had taken his allegations seriously. Willow watched everything with her attentive eyes, remembering the conversations she had heard hidden behind the plants of the forum. She had learned to distinguish when adults were lying by the tone of their voices and by the way they moved their hands, and she could clearly see that the man in the black suit was very scared. Furthermore, the judge continued, I discovered that the clerk responsible for cataloguing the evidence, Mr. Abernathy, received a bank deposit of considerable value 3 days before the date on which the incriminating documents were discovered. Mr. Abernathy, until then discreet at his side table, paled visibly. His hands trembled as he tried to organize his papers, dropping some on the floor. The sound of the documents falling echoed through the room like a silent confession. This is absurd, protested Sterling, but his voice came out sharper than he intended. Are we going to accept the testimony of a girl who lives on the streets, who may have invented all this? She can't even read. It was at that moment that Jasper stood up from his chair, feeling a courage he hadn't experienced in years. Your Honor, I request permission for the girl Willow to tell exactly what she witnessed. The judge nodded, and Willow was called forward. Walking with small but determined steps, she positioned herself near the magistrate's desk. Despite her young age, there was a seriousness in her posture that completely silenced the room. Tell everyone what you told me, my dear, the judge encouraged her gently. Willow looked at Sterling and then at Abernathy, showing no fear. I saw you two talking behind the big building, near the trees where I sleep when it rains. The man in the black suit said that the other man had to put fake papers in the factory owner's case and that they would make a lot of money if they managed to get him arrested. And do you remember anything else from that conversation? Asked the judge. I remember that they talked about a man who was going to pay $500,000 when everything was over, Willow replied, with the precision that only a child's mind focused on survival could have. They said that this man had the same kind of factory and wanted to be the only one selling furniture in the city. The revelation provoked an explosion of murmurs in the room. $500,000 was an amount that explained the motivation behind such an elaborate conspiracy. Jasper felt a mixture of relief and anger consuming his chest, finally understanding the extent of the evil he had faced. Sterling stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. This is ridiculous. We're going to accept the testimony of a girl who lives on the streets, who may have invented all this. She can't even read. Yes, I can, Willow replied calmly, surprising everyone. I learned by looking at the papers you throw in the trash and asking the cleaning lady what was written. The judge leaned forward, intrigued. And what else have you learned from observing around here? I learned that when people lie, they move their hands a lot and can't look in the eyes of the person asking, Willow said, looking directly at Sterling. And I learned that some people say one thing in front of others and a different thing when they think no one is watching. The brutal innocence of the observation cut through all legal formalities. Even the most cynical journalists felt touched by the simple wisdom of that girl who had learned to survive by reading the lies of adults. Mr. Abernathy could no longer maintain his composure. He rose from his chair and in a trembling voice made a confession that would change the course of everything. I need to tell the truth. I can't carry this weight anymore." The silence was absolute. All heads turned to the middle-aged clerk, who had worked at the Forum for 15 years without ever raising suspicions about his integrity. "Theodore Cartwright contacted me 6 months ago," continued Abernathy, tears beginning to stream down his face. "My daughter was sick, needing expensive surgery, and I didn't have money. He offered $500,000 if I helped incriminate Jasper Blackwood." The confession was like a bomb exploding in the room. Jasper closed his eyes, feeling a mixture of vindication and sadness. Finally, the truth was coming to light, but the price had been 2 years of suffering, the near bankruptcy of his company, and the destruction of his reputation. "And you, Mr. Sterling?" the judge asked, his eyes fixed on the prosecutor. Mr. Abernathy hesitated for a moment, looking at his former accomplice. "Sterling received $200,000 to ensure the accusation was carried forward, even knowing the evidence was forged. Sterling tried to protest, but his voice failed. The web of lies he had built was crumbling before his eyes, and the presence of that small girl had somehow catalyzed a collapse that seemed inevitable. The judge declared Jasper innocent of all charges and ordered the immediate arrest of Prosecutor Sterling and Mr. Abernathy. As the two were led out of the room in handcuffs, Willow remained beside Jasper, timidly holding the businessman's hand. "Why did you do this?" Jasper asked, crouching down to be at the girl's height. "Why did you risk everything to help me?" Willow looked at him with her big, sincere eyes. "Because you have sad eyes just like mine," she said simply. "And people with sad eyes need to help each other." At that moment, Jasper understood that his life had been saved by someone who had absolutely nothing but had chosen to do what was right. At the same time, a question haunted his mind. Who was Theodore Cartwright really, and what else was he capable of doing to destroy his competitors? 3 weeks had passed since the trial, and Jasper's life had changed drastically. His proven innocence brought back many customers, but the factory still faced financial difficulties after 2 years of legal battles. What worried him most, however, was Willow. The girl had refused to go to a shelter and continued sleeping on the courthouse steps, even with Jasper offering help daily. That Tuesday morning, Jasper arrived at the courthouse with a package of cookies and warm milk, as he had done every day. He found Willow sitting in her usual spot, drawing on the ground with a piece of charcoal she had found. "Good morning, little one," he said, sitting next to her on the stone steps. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood," Willow replied, without looking up from the drawing. It was a figure of a woman with long hair, surrounded by small flowers. "Is that your mother?" Jasper asked gently. Willow nodded, her small hands trembling slightly. She liked flowers. She always said they made the world more beautiful, even when everything around was ugly. Jasper observed the drawing carefully. Despite her age, Willow had impressive artistic skill. Each stroke carried emotion, each detail told a story of longing and love. "Willow, I need to ask you some questions about your mother. Maybe I can find out what happened to her." The girl finally raised her eyes, a mixture of hope and fear shining in her gaze. "Do you think she might be alive?" "I don't know, but I'll try to find out," Jasper said, feeling the weight of the promise he was making. "What was her full name?" "Briar Rose," Willow replied. "She worked cleaning offices at night. She left when I was asleep and came back early in the morning, always tired." Jasper mentally noted the name. After what he had discovered about the conspiracy, he suspected that the disappearance of Willow's mother was no coincidence. Theodore Cartwright had proven himself capable of terrible things, and something told him that there were more secrets to be uncovered. That afternoon, Jasper went to the office of the lawyer who had helped in his case, Dr. Finch. The 60-year-old man had become not only his defender, but also a close friend during the most difficult times. "Finch, I need your help to investigate the disappearance of a woman named Briar Rose." Jasper said, entering the modest office in downtown. "The mother of the girl who helped you?" asked Finch, adjusting his glasses on his desk full of cases. "Exactly. I have a feeling that her disappearance is connected with this whole conspiracy against me." Finch leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "Jasper, you need to be careful. Theodore Cartwright hasn't been arrested yet, just his henchman. A man capable of bribing prosecutors and clerks can be very dangerous when he feels cornered. That's why I need to find out the truth. That girl saved my life, and I can't simply ignore what may have happened to her mother." Finch sighed and opened a drawer, taking out some papers. "I've already started investigating on my own. I found records that Briar Rose worked for the cleaning company that provided services to several companies in the city, including Theodore's factory." Jasper felt a chill down his spine. "She worked there. She worked for 4 months, until she abruptly disappeared 2 years ago. According to the records, she simply didn't show up for work anymore without prior notice. And no one investigated? A poor woman with no known family who worked at dawn. The authorities considered that she simply left town in search of better opportunities." Jasper clenched his fists. The negligence of the authorities had left a 2-year-old child abandoned to her own fate, and now he began to suspect that Briar hadn't left of her own free will. While Jasper was investigating on the other side of town, Theodore Cartwright paced nervously through his factory office. The arrest of Sterling and Abernathy had left him in a panic, knowing that it was only a matter of time before his participation in the conspiracy was discovered. Theodore was a 55-year-old man with an impeccable appearance and a reputation as a respected businessman in the community. He had built his furniture factory through methods that weren't always ethical, but he had never been caught. The competition with Jasper had become an obsession, especially after he started losing important contracts to the rival company. His phone rang, and the nervous voice of his secretary echoed through the intercom. "Mr. Cartwright, there's an investigator here wanting to talk to you about the Jasper Blackwood case. Tell him I'm not here," he replied quickly, but it was too late. The door opened, and a middle-aged man, wearing a simple suit, entered the office. "Mr. Cartwright, I'm Investigator Davies. I need to ask you some questions about your employees." Theodore tried to maintain his composure, but his hands trembled slightly. "I don't know how I can help you. I have nothing to do with Jasper's case. Actually, I'm investigating the disappearance of Briar Rose. She worked here, didn't she?" The name hit Theodore like a punch in the stomach. Briar had been the mistake that had haunted him for 2 years, the moment he had crossed a line from which he could no longer return. I don't remember any employee with that name," he lied, but the investigator was already noting his reaction. "Interesting, because I have her payment records here. 4 months of salary, all signed by you." At that moment, Theodore understood that his web of lies was beginning to unravel, just as it had happened with Sterling and Abernathy. The difference was that he had much more to hide. Meanwhile, Jasper had decided to take Willow to his house for the first time. The girl had finally agreed to leave the courthouse steps, but only for a few hours. Jasper's house was simple but cozy, located in a quiet residential neighborhood. There were photographs of his late wife, Hazel, scattered around the living room, and a small but well-kept garden in the back. "Your house is beautiful," Willow said, observing everything with curiosity. "It looks like the houses I used to draw when Mommy was still with me." "You can stay here if you want," offered Jasper for the 10th time. "I have a spare room, and you would be safe." Willow shook her head. "I can't yet. What if Mommy comes back and doesn't find me where she left me?" The girl's faith broke Jasper's heart. How to explain to a 4-year-old child that her mother probably would never return? How to destroy the only hope that kept her alive? That night, after taking Willow back to the courthouse, Jasper received a call that would change everything. It was Finch, his voice tense and worried. "Jasper, I need you to come to my office immediately. Investigator Davies has brought disturbing information about Briar Rose. What did he find out? It's better if we talk in person, and bring Willow. She may need to hear this too, however painful it may be. Jasper felt a weight in his stomach. Whatever the discovery, he knew it would change Willow's life forever. At the same time, a part of him yearned for the truth, even if it brought more pain. An hour later, the three were gathered in Finch's office. Davies had brought a folder full of documents, photographs and notes. Willow was sitting on Jasper's lap, playing with a small doll he had bought for her, oblivious to the gravity of the situation. "I found evidence that Briar Rose discovered something compromising about Theodore Cartwright's operations," began Davies. "She had collected documents proving tax evasion and other irregularities." "And what happened to her?" asked Jasper, although he already feared the answer. Davies hesitated, looking at Willow. "Maybe it's better if the girl doesn't hear this." "No," said Willow surprisingly, raising her eyes from the doll. "I want to know what happened to Mommy. I'm old enough to know the truth." The three men exchanged glances, impressed by the child's maturity. Davies took a deep breath and continued. "Briar was last seen leaving Theodore's factory in a March dawn, 2 years ago. The next day, Theodore fired all the cleaning staff and hired a new company." "That doesn't prove anything definitively," said Finch, trying to maintain hope. "No," agreed Davies, "but I found a witness. A night watchman who was working in the industrial area that night saw Briar arguing with Theodore in the factory parking lot. She was holding a folder of documents and shouting that she was going to report him. The silence that followed was heavy and painful. Willow had stopped playing and was staring intently at Davies, processing the information with a seriousness that shouldn't exist in a child her age. "My mommy found out he was a bad man," she said finally, her voice small but firm. "And he hurt her because of that." Jasper hugged her tighter, feeling tears burning his eyes. The same child who had saved his life was now facing the terrible truth about the loss of her mother. "What do we do now?" asked Jasper. "Now," replied Davies, "we need to find concrete evidence, and you both need to be very careful. Theodore has already shown that he is capable of anything to protect his secrets." 2 months had passed since the discovery about Briar, and the investigation seemed to have reached a dead end. Theodore Cartwright had hired the best lawyers in the region and denied any involvement in the disappearance. Without concrete evidence, the authorities couldn't act against him. Jasper watched Willow play in the backyard of his house, where she had finally agreed to live after weeks of gentle persuasion. The girl had grown in recent months, not only physically, but also emotionally. She had learned to trust again, to smile, and showed an exceptional intelligence that impressed everyone. "Uncle Jasper," said Willow, running to him with a drawing in her hands, "I drew a picture of Mommy in heaven, watching over us." Jasper took the drawing, feeling his heart tighten. In recent months, he had become attached to the girl in a way he hadn't expected. She had filled a void in his life that had existed since the loss of his wife Hazel 5 years earlier. "It's very beautiful, my daughter," he said, using for the first time the affectionate term that had begun to sprout naturally. Willow smiled, but her eyes still carried a sadness that seemed too old for her age. "Uncle, do you think Mommy knows I'm safe now?" "I'm sure she knows," replied Jasper, hugging the girl, "and she must be very proud of you." That afternoon, while Willow napped in her new room, Jasper received an unexpected visit. Carol Sawyer, his secretary for 15 years, was standing at the door with an expression of nervousness he had never seen before. "Carol, what are you doing here? I thought you had gone to visit your sister in the capital." "Jasper, we need to talk," she said, her hands trembling visibly. "About everything that's happened in the last few years. About Theodore. About your wife, Hazel." A chill ran down Jasper's spine. Hazel had died in a car accident 5 years before, a tragedy he had never been able to completely overcome. What does Hazel have to do with this? Carol entered the house, looking nervously around, as if she feared being watched. I couldn't live with this secret any longer. For all these years I'd been carrying a guilt that was killing me inside. What secret, Carol? She sat on the couch, tears beginning to stream down her face. I betrayed you, Jasper. For 5 years, I passed confidential company information to Theodore Cartwright. He paid me very well, and I needed the money to take care of my sick mother. Jasper felt like he had been punched in the stomach. Carol was like a sister to him, someone he trusted completely. For 5 years. Since when? Since shortly after I started working for you. Theodore approached me, said it was just harmless business information. Contracts you were negotiating, new customers, pricing strategies. At first, it seemed harmless. And then, Carol sobbed harder. Then he started asking for more specific things. Financial documents, information about important meetings, and when I tried to stop, she paused, wiping away tears with trembling hands. When you tried to stop what? Insisted Jasper, feeling a terrible discovery approaching. He said that if I didn't continue to help, he would do something terrible to someone close to you. I thought that it was just an empty threat until what, Carol? Until the night Hazel died, she whispered, the words coming out as a painful confession. That afternoon, Theodore called me saying he had a special gift planned for you, that you were going to learn not to interfere in his business. Jasper stood up abruptly, the world spinning around him. You're saying that Hazel's accident wasn't an accident, confirmed Carol, sobbing. Theodore had her car's brakes sabotaged. Hazel found out about the irregularities in his accounting through a friend of hers, an accountant, and she was planning to report him. Theodore couldn't allow that. The silence that followed was deafening. Jasper leaned against the wall, feeling his legs weaken. For 5 years, he had lived with the pain of losing his wife in an accident, when in reality she had been murdered by the man who was now also responsible for the disappearance of Willow's mother. Why are you telling me this now? He asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. Because I can't live with this guilt anymore. And because when I saw that little girl, orphaned because of the same monster who killed your wife, I realized that I had to do the right thing, even if it's too late. At that moment, Willow's small voice echoed through the room. Uncle Jasper? Why is Aunt Carol crying? Jasper turned around and saw the girl standing on the stairs, holding her favorite doll. Her big eyes observed the scene with the sharp perception she had developed to survive on the streets. Come here, honey, said Jasper, extending his arms to her. Willow came down the stairs and approached him, but her eyes remained fixed on Carol. Auntie is sad like I used to be when I remembered Mommy, she said with the simple wisdom of childhood. Carol looked at the girl, and a new wave of tears welled up. You're a very smart girl, Willow. I know, replied Willow, approaching Carol. And I know that sometimes people do bad things because they're scared, but then they regret it. The child's innocence and understanding touched Carol deeply. Do you forgive me? She asked, crouching down to be at Willow's height. Mommy always said that forgiving makes your heart lighter, replied Willow, extending her small hand to Carol. And Uncle Jasper needs a lighter heart too. That night, after Carol left promising to tell everything to the authorities, Jasper put Willow to bed and then sat in the garden, processing the avalanche of revelations. Investigator Davies arrived an hour later with a team of investigators. With Carol's testimony and the evidence they had collected, they finally had enough to confront Theodore Cartwright. He can't run anymore, said Davies, organizing the documents on the kitchen table. We have witnesses, physical evidence of the sabotage of your wife's car and the connection to the disappearance of Briar. And how long will it take for him to be arrested? With this evidence, a few hours. The next day, Theodore Cartwright was arrested at his own factory in front of hundreds of employees and journalists. The headlines of the local newspapers plastered the complete story. Businessman murders rival's wife and makes woman disappear to cover up crimes. During the trial that followed, Willow didn't need to testify. There was enough evidence without exposing the child to more trauma. Theodore was convicted of double murder and conspiracy, receiving a life sentence. 3 months later, on a sunny spring morning, Jasper and Willow were at the city hall. After months of paperwork and psychological evaluations, the adoption process had finally been completed. "Now you're officially my daughter," said Jasper, holding the documents that made Willow Rose Blackwood his legal heir. "And you're officially my dad," replied Willow, smiling with a joy he hadn't seen since he met her. Jasper's factory had recovered completely, and he had created a program to help children living on the streets, inspired by his experience with Willow. The girl, now 5 years old, attended a private school where her exceptional intelligence impressed teachers and classmates. On a Sunday afternoon, father and daughter visited the small city cemetery. They brought flowers to Hazel's grave, where Jasper had a plaque installed in memory of Briar Rose as well. "Would Mom Hazel have liked me?" asked Willow, arranging the flowers carefully. "She would have loved you from the first moment," replied Jasper, knowing it was true. "And your Mom Briar would be proud of the courageous woman you are becoming." Willow nodded, then turned to Jasper with her big, bright eyes. "Dad, can I tell you a secret?" "Of course, honey. Sometimes, when I'm very happy, I feel like they're both watching me and smiling, and I think they became friends in heaven and are happy because now we're a family." Jasper hugged his daughter, feeling a peace he hadn't experienced in years. 2 broken hearts had met and healed each other. Justice had been done, the truth had triumphed, and a little girl who had saved an innocent man now had the loving home she always deserved. As they walked back home, Willow hummed softly a new song she had learned at school. No longer the sad melody she sang when she lived on the streets, but a song of hope and joy. And Jasper knew, watching his daughter play in the garden that afternoon, that sometimes the greatest blessings in life come through the greatest tragedies, and that love can flourish even in the most barren soils of suffering. If you liked this wonderful story, please comment. Your opinion is very important, and if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.